This is I'm Stuck, and in this video we will look at Kennan's long telegram and Churchill's Iron Curtain speech. So first of all, we will look at the long telegram, which was sent on the 22nd of February 1946. And George Kennan was an American diplomat, and he was a chargé d'affaires in the US Embassy in Moscow. And on the 22nd of February 1946, he sent this 8,000 word telegram, which hence the name the long telegram, and this was sent to the Department of State. And this telegram was thought to have influenced the US policies towards the Soviet Union and introduced one of the main USA tactics, which was containment. Now, containment was one of the policies named in the Truman Doctrine, and it had arisen from the US fears that if one country became communist, it would apply pressure on neighbouring countries and they would also become communist. And now this was later known as the domino theory. But we will learn more about the Truman Doctrine in our next video. Now, Kennan had always favoured a hardline approach towards the USSR, and before Yalta he had supported the idea of splitting Europe into two spheres of influence which did not cross. And he also believed that Stalin wanted to demonise the West and replace the fear of Germany and Japan, who obviously the Grand Alliance were against in World War II, and he wanted to replace that with the demonisation of Britain and the USA. However, Stalin also believed that Britain and the USA wanted to demonise himself in the USSR. So this meant that he thought that the collapse of relationships between the East and the West was inevitable, and he emphasised that it was essential for the US to be proactive within Europe, with the use of force being one of these options. He also thought that the Soviets would attempt to expand their own power into Iran and Turkey, and Truman, who was the president after Roosevelt and was the president at this time, thought that the USSR were also a threat to Western democratic values and the US security as well. So Kennan also added to his thoughts by writing the X article, which he wrote under the pseudonym of Mr. X. And in this he stated that the Soviets' foreign policy was aggressive and ideologically driven, and that their expansion should not be controlled by US containment. And we saw the Soviets' approach to Eastern Europe in our last video, where we saw that Stalin was clearly not just wanting a buffer zone, he wanted power. And as a result of the long telegram, the Truman administration would back away from this minimal involvement in foreign affairs, and instead they would favour economic imperialism, in which a state could use its economic power to ensure an economically weaker state becomes dependent on it. And this introduced the idea of things like the Marshall Plan, which we will learn about in a later video. Now, with regards to the Soviet Union, the US also started to favour a military approach rather than a diplomatic approach that they had before. So another important turning point in the Cold War which influenced more views was the Iron Curtain speech made on 5th of March 1946 by the former Prime Minister of England, Winston Churchill. And he delivered his Iron Curtain speech at Fulton, Missouri. And in his speech he condemned the Soviet policies whilst promoting a special relationship between Britain and the US. Now, he obviously wanted this special relationship because US were very powerful and Britain were weak economically. Now, he advised the US that strength was the most effective way of dealing with the Soviet Union, considering their expansionist policies. Now, this speech convinced many that a tough stance was the only way of dealing with the Soviet Union. However, many also disagreed with this special relationship which he had put forward, because Britain had a diminishing British Empire and USA didn't really want to be too big a part of that, despite the fact that they wanted to stay good allies. Now, the speech also had many impacts on Stalin as well, and he believed that both Britain and America were carrying out these anti-Soviet attacks, which also thing about the fact that they were trying to demonize himself. And instead of Churchill claiming that Russia and Soviet Union just wanted this indefinite expansion of their powers and doctrines, Stalin and Molotov both claimed that their actions in Eastern Europe, which we saw last video, were simply just to reinforce USSR security. And Molotov also justified their policy by saying that the USA were an imperialistic power, so they essentially abandoned their agreement to the liberated Europe agreed at Yalta. So both of these events were one of the main turning points in the Cold War, which essentially started to create worse relationships and a definite divide between East and West in this metaphorical line, the Iron Curtain, which went all through Europe. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you liked it, and see you soon. Bye.